Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us this lovely Tuesday lunchtime. And we're going to be talking about the Moata Carbon Portal. Just first, a quick introduction. My name is Kim Yates, and I'm the UK and Europe Sustainability and Climate Change Lead for Mott MacDonald. And this is something that we have been working on for quite some time. I'm going to take you through initially a presentation to set the scene, and then we're going to get on to the really interesting bit where my colleague Natasha Johnson will be joining us to give a live demo, and so you can actually see the portal live and working. So if you move on to the next slide, please. So as Mott MacDonald, we've been on this journey for quite some time, going back to way in 2013, where we published the Infrastructure Carbon Review that showed a clear relationship between cut cost and cut carbon in the infrastructure sector. And as part of that, we co-wrote the publication, PAS 2080, which again is the world's first carbon management for infrastructure and embodied carbon. And as part of this, we have been developing the carbon portal behind the scenes to help address minimising carbon and doing what we need to do in the infrastructure space to play our part in the net zero world. So as I said, you can see from here, we've been on this journey quite some time. And again, within our own company in 2017, within the UK, we made it mandatory all that time ago to make carbon assessment part and parcel of what we deliver for our clients. In 2019, having developed the carbon portal for our own users and road tested it on ourselves on a global basis with all 16,000 of our staff, in 2019, we started to develop the portal as software as a service so we could share this tool with our clients and with people who need to understand this space. In 2020, as a company, we became carbon neutral, which means that we're walking the talk. And again, we're on that net zero journey to become net zero by 2040. And the carbon portal is part and parcel of that. And what we're going to show you here is the tool that we've developed, again, for the infrastructure embodied carbon space to help us make those real low carbon decisions and make a real difference going forward. So if we move on to the next one, I hope. So again, I've related that we have been on a journey in this space for quite some time. We're in our 5th year of being PAS 2080 accredited, which again, we're not just talking about it, we're doing it within our projects. And in 2021, we published with Skanska, the Net Zero Infrastructure Coalition. We showed that the future pipeline of UK and embodied carbon was we do not have a very good whole feel for what the budget is relating to carbon emissions from our infrastructure projects going forward. And again, this tool forms part and part of that journey. So if we move on to the next one. So the overall vision of the carbon portal and the mission that will pop up in a minute is to democratize carbon expertise and help designers, engineers, people at the coalface, if you excuse the pun, to make those low carbon decisions. This is part and parcel. I'm a carbon specialist. I will assume that I've done a really good job if I'm not needed anymore, and the portal is part of that. So again, it's about responding to industry's needs, identifying those barriers, and again, trying to make carbon calculations nice and easy for people. You can't reduce something you don't understand, you can't measure. So again, this is part and parcel of it. So this helps set the scene. So if we move on to the next one, please. So this is it, up and running. And again, what we've been doing is we've been working with our own staff, our clients, to produce a nice, easy to use interface. And it's like it says on the tin, it's a portal. It's a portal to carbon. As we get new data sets in, we upload them into the portal and again, make it easy and quick for people to do carbon calculations. And it's not mysterious, and it allows you to do that hot spotting you can see here. And again, in the demo, you'll see this very, very clearly. It allows you to do that hot spotting and reduce where you can make the best difference. So if we move on to the next one. So again, as we said, it's driven by user feedback, and now I'm going to pass across to Natasha, who's going to take us through what the portal does and how we've evolved it from the last time we spoke.
Thanks for that, Kim. My name is Natasha Johnson and I'm the product manager for the Moata Carbon Portal. And just before we jump directly into the demo aspect of things, I'm just going to set the scene with the explanation behind one of the new functionalities that we've released and that we'll run through later. So just for those of you that are unaware of this particular curve, which comes from the PAS 2080 documentation that Kim mentioned earlier that we are co-authors on. What this curve fundamentally says is that really the biggest opportunities for carbon reduction on a project are really at those initial stages where we can reduce between 100 to 80% by having a look at building nothing and building less. However, the real challenge we started to encounter was the fact that at those early stages tends to be when we actually have the least amount of information on a project. So if we're looking at a new development, we won't know from the get-go how big that's going to be, what exact materials are going to be in there, and where those materials are going to come from. So when we're looking at that challenge, what we've begun to understand is that what would be really handy is actually to be able to generate assumptions so that off the shelf, without having to do that whole thought process of knowing exactly what materials are going to go in whatever asset, being able to take something that immediately makes those assumptions so we can have a rough understanding from the get-go of how much carbon we're going to be looking at. What we also start to understand as we delve through that is that actually generating assumptions itself isn't actually the end solution, purely because once we get to that next stage where we start to get that information about exactly what materials are going to be used, etc., we need to be able to understand what was done in that initial stage. So really what we need to do in addition to generating assumptions is having a look at making assumptions that are transparent and traceable in a way that we can then expose them. The third bit of this challenge that we were looking at is also the fact that actually what would be the most beneficial for our users is to be able to empower them to actually modify those assumptions, so that in those projects where you do actually know which contractor you're going to be working with, what materials you're going to be using, you actually can put in the piece of information that you already have so that your initial carbon assessment will actually be more accurate at that early stage. We're going to jump into the demo side of things. I'll give a quick overview of how the Carbon Portal looks and works for those of you that are unfamiliar with it before we then jump into what exactly this functionality looks like that's responded to that challenge. And bringing it up now. So for those of you that are unaware, Moata itself gives access to users purely based on email. So whatever instance you decide to set up, all we basically require to know of your users is an email address, which they'll then be able to use to log into this first interface. What we'll first land in here is the Mortar Lobby, which basically shows you all the different products, the different instances that you might have access to, as well as the Carbon Portal. So if you're interested in any other product, or if there might be any use for other products on your project, you can absolutely find more information about them in this space. So if we jump directly into the McDonald version of the Carbon Portal for you, because that's where I have most of my information. What we'll see here first is a list of designs within that instance, and also the ability to actually search within it. So if you're looking to have a quick understanding of what projects have gone on in any particular sector or any particular design stage, just because the idea of the Carbon Portal is really to be used from that brief stage all the way through to the operation and end of life, so you can have that consistency in carbon assessments throughout the project lifecycle, then you can absolutely do that here. And also just to add on to here that although we can have a look at a number of different designs that are created by other users, you're also absolutely able to create private designs that only you're able to view if you've got any confidentiality concerns or anything like that. So if we jump directly into an existing design, and here this particular example is just having a look at restating a road. The core functionality of the Carbon Portal is essentially just to have a host of data sets here, which is the most comprehensive data set we've got in the industry. Find whatever asset might be more appropriate. So if we're looking to include some bricks in our wool component, then we can drag and drop that across, specify whatever quantity we're looking at, and immediately what we have is an understanding of the amount of carbon that's actually associated with that asset. Now that's all grand and good, understanding exactly how much carbon is already in a design, and this is what's been done already here with all the different materials that we're going to be looking at. But like Kim mentioned earlier, the actual core of the carbon portal is really to push those reduction decisions. And what we've got to enable that is this breakdown chart here, which really drives a thought process that should be really easy and should take seconds. So for example, here, having a look at this road reinstatement design, we'll see that most of the carbon is actually associated with the drainage component of that. So we can drill down further into that. And we'll be able to see at a glance that that's mostly down to construction materials, and that's mostly down to the plastic component of the drainage. So if we're looking to reduce carbon on this one particular design, we'd know to either reduce the amount of drainage that we're considering, or have a look at a less carbon intensive material than plastic, and that will create the largest carbon savings. Not only that, and we're just going to touch upon the integrations here, but if you do want any deeper understanding of the BIM or bill of quantity integration, please do get in touch. We're just going to skim over those today. We do have the ability to integrate with Revit and Civil 3D directly, which will create a CSV you can then pull in directly here, and we'll then upload that information you got within a Revit model, for example, in a matter of seconds, instead of you having to go through that manual drag and dropping process. Additionally, just to touch on it, we do have the ability to raise any requests or access any external additional resources to help you through your journey with the Carbon Portal that you'll be able to access directly as soon as you got access to the Carbon Portal, as we'll see in a second. So through here with how-to guides, etc. So all of that's available as soon as you got access to the Moata Carbon Portal. Now that represents the Carbon Portal at a quick glance, and you may have noticed in this design in particular, what we have is already a great amount of information about exactly what materials are going to be in it. So in terms of early optioneering, this isn't quite an accurate example. So if we jump into something completely different, where we're having a look at a new development, let's consider a particularly easy asset, hopefully, where we just know that we're going to be including a set of stairs in this new development. We don't know exactly how many steps, we don't know how many platforms, we don't know what the handrails are going to look like, but we just know that we want to include some stairs in steel. So what we can do is already find that asset, stairs, galvanized steel, similar to previously, drag and drop that across. And if we know that we're only looking for one set of stairs and we'll specify roughly 3 meters high, then we'll already have an understanding of the amount of carbon associated with that. So that means that already, without having to know all the amount of information that we typically would have to do, we'll have a rough understanding of how much carbon is associated with that asset at a high level. So essentially, that means that we've responded to that first element of the challenge of actually being able to generate assumptions at a high level. Now, that's all grand and good, but if I actually want to understand if this asset for stairs is applicable to what I might be looking at, we need to be able to query that further. So if we decide to select to inspect component, we'll be able to see a bit more information about the particular library this comes from, but in particular, we'll be able to see the quadratic assumptions. So what this means is that in order to inform how much carbon is associated with this asset, a number of carbon assessments have been done that look at that asset in particular for specific drivers. If we have a look at what this particular set of stairs looks like, and it's 3.52 meters tall, we'll be able to see exactly how much steel is used, what the quantity is, and where we're expecting that steel to come from as part of the construction transport, including what mode of transport are used. So really, that level of traceability and transparency has also been met. Now, that's all great and good, but if we consider now the third option, well, the third level of challenge, which is that we need to actually be able to modify these assumptions if that's appropriate, then what we should be able to do is actually modify the existing designs to include that. So let's consider the example that we know specifically for this development that we're going to be using a supplier that's down the road that does a great amount of recycled steel. Then what we can do is we've got a design that we cannot change, but if we decide to duplicate it, And you can tell I've updated my Wi-Fi contract and it's not worked out very well for me. But if we decide to duplicate it for a particular example using recycled steel, what we can do here is, assuming that we've got the same weight, just for simplicity on this one, then we can look up an asset for recycled steel, drag and drop that across. And we'll here assume, because in this initial design, the steps and the cleats are separated, we'll keep that distinction here. And put in the same quantities. And deleting the previous ones. That means we've created a design that has a look at exactly the same asset, but here with a material choice that we specified. If we return to our original development where we're having a look at this, what we can do here is actually drag and drop a custom component, because here we've built up the information behind the scenes to be able to do that. Here immediately it brings up the design IDs. Might have done a bit of work previously to actually create those designs just to spare you the manual tasks on screen. But if we here add all the designs that we've included with recycled steel, so this one's 2.2 meters high. And finally, the third one is 3.52 meters high. Then that will calculate. We'll be able to specify here, because we know that there's stairs with recycled steel. And if we decide to use exactly the same quantity of one set of stairs of 3 meters high, then once that calculates, we can already understand the amount of carbon that's associated with that, and appreciate as well how much reduction we've obtained by actually using recycled steel instead of normal steel. Now that's all grand and good for our example, but what that actually means is that we started to answer that third challenge of being able to actually empower our users to make that modification in high-level optioneering assets, that they're able to actually understand what's in there as well as change them when that's appropriate. And we've used in particular here the example of stairs, hopefully because everyone can visualize what a set of stairs looks like. But this is actually something that's applicable to all sorts of different assets. So if we're looking at pipes, if we're looking at roads, etc., it's something that can be built bespoke to match all the sectors across the board with certain specifications. So that brings us to an end of our external demo. And just to touch upon the fact that, as Kim mentioned earlier, we really are reliant on user feedback to drive the development of this continuously evolving tool. Also, what we're looking at is a roadmap for the next 2 years or so, where this is, of course, reliant on user feedback, and we're going to keep building and scoping it out to match exactly what it should. But some of the really exciting things we're looking at for the next few years are things like really facilitating the identification of low carbon alternatives. So being able to be steered in that direction of seeing that recycled steel actually has a lot less carbon than standard steel. Also, we're going to be taking a step back so that we can appreciate more of the bigger picture, so understanding things like being able to enable a better program level monitoring instead of having this really accurate level of representation of carbon at a design level only. And also, although we didn't touch upon it today, what we're going to be looking at is enhancing really our BIM integration, so making ourselves more BIM agnostic and having a look at other synergies with Moata products and beyond, because there's a lot of conversations going on, I think, at the moment that understand that carbon can go really line in line with a lot of other assessments, whether it's cost or whether it's other elements of that. So that's something that we are going to be looking at in the next 2 years, and we're really excited by. But by all means, if there is any more feedback or any more ideas you want to throw our way, we're always ears for that. And that brings us onto the end of our presentation, onto the Q&A section. We have left our emails there if you do want to get in touch about any more specific elements of the Carbon Portal, whether it's BIM or any other aspect. But if you do also want to have a look and play around with the Carbon Portal yourself, you can absolutely request access to a demo version, which has admittedly less databases than we do in the full version, but that will give you a good feel of how exactly the Carbon Portal looks. That should bring us on to the questions.
Okay, we've got quite a few questions in. and some of them are anonymous. Some are people that I've had the pleasure of already speaking to. But we'll start off with, do we provide the CO2 estimation with asset deterioration rates? For instance, one asset may be associated with low CO2 emissions, but may have a short lifespan and require replacement soon. So what that is whole life carbon accounting effectively. So yes, we can build that into the portal. What we're also in the process of doing is making that much easier for people to look at whole life carbon and look at the maintenance cycles and in build for the whole of the design life, because as you've rightly pointed out, some low CO2 materials don't last as long, and it's about doing that whole life calculation. And we've done that for a number of different assets across different sectors, and some of the results can be quite surprising. So I don't know. The other one is, does the carbon portal cover the operational carbon calculations like power consumption for pumps and screens? If I pass back to Natasha for that one.
Yep, absolutely. So we do absolutely. We've got a couple of libraries to account for operational and construction energy and fuel within there. So that's where you'd be able to find that level of information to include in there. It is at a fairly high level, purely because carbon assessments are, but you'd be able to specify in there how much electricity usage or fuel usage, as well as regional variations, and understand the amount of consumption and carbon associated with that.
Okay.
I'm also seeing. Oh, sorry.
Do you want to go for it?
Yeah, there's a question asking, when selecting an asset for carbon, is this just the embedded carbon, or does it include installation, transport, etc.? So there's different levels of that. If you've got libraries that carry whole assets like these stairs that we've got here, for example, what you'll be able to see when you inspect component is that in terms of the breakdown for that asset, although we've got a high level of construction materials, we also do include transport within there. So it also shows that transport is a small amount of that asset emission. For things like our material libraries, you'd be able to input that by using our transport libraries within that, so you can make those specific quantities that you're aware of in there, whereas like the high level assets will have that embedded in it, and you'll be able to query that by selecting inspect component.
I can see that there's a question from Jimmy Carter. Is there a level of accuracy / confidence associated with each of the carbon quantities associated with materials? Now, in terms of carbon, the orders of accuracy, it's not a very accurate science, and there is a level of confidence associated with each of the materials, and that is improving more and more as we get better data and better informed all the way through. But the key thing of any tool is establishing your baseline and then looking at those reductions all the way through. If you start to worry about, oh, is it accurate to 0.5%, for example, you start to get yourself into a bit of hot water from that perspective. But there is certainly, with the data that we have behind the scenes on all of this, we check it and make sure it makes sense. So it's still an evolving field. The data is still getting better. The thing I really like about this is as the data improves, we get it straight in there in the portal as fast as we can and make it available for our users. Now, Callum, you've got a question on, does this record operational carbon? Shall I pass that on to you, Natasha?
Yep, absolutely. So like we pointed out previously, what we've got is a couple of libraries relating to the operational energy and transport that you'd expect to use in a project, where again you can input the amount of energy or fuel usage that you're expecting, so it does include operational, yes. Also see the next question from Anonymous. Does your data bank also provide LCA embodied carbon footprints of devices, e.g. monitors, etc.? So we've got a number of of libraries and databases are available here. What we can do is upload new databases within a matter of weeks. So if there's specific devices that you're looking to include in there, that can be uploaded. For things like modules, I think we already have a couple of assets within here that we can have a look at. But if there's anything missing, we will upload it and make it available. Not for that one. We can also create custom components within here. So if you happen to have an asset that you're aware of what the environmental product declaration has in there and it doesn't happen to be covered, we can include that by creating a custom component where you can specify that.
And Misha asked the question, how do you handle matching to existing bills of quantities or bills of materials where data is often quite noisy?
So in that one, we do have the ability to import a bill of quantity CSV that has to be in a specific format. For some of that, it does require a bit of allocation to the specific carbon codes that we use within here. But what you do find is that there's a lot of synergies because we've got elements like a number of our libraries are actually written up following the method of measurements that's used in the costing in costing and things like highways and civil engineering. So we have got databases that were built up to match those costing databases that tend to be used for bill of quantities. So it doesn't have, well, it's built to not be as long of a task as they sometimes can be with other tools.
And I'll take this one from Neil. Will the whole life calculation include energy and operational use? We have energy data in there, emission factors associated with energy. So as long as we know what the power consumption is, we can build that into the whole life carbon calculation. And you'll see for the water sector, we do that routinely. The operational energy consumption is part and parcel of it. So did you want to add any more to that, Natasha?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay. And the other one, Marcus, you said, similar to Janelle, is there a possibility of working out the carbon impact of digital infrastructure, servers, power consumption? So this is something that we don't routinely use the portal for because it is focused on infrastructure, what we're doing in asset maintenance, but it can be used for those sort of calculations. Again, it's all based on power consumption. If we know the power consumption, we can work out the emissions associated with that power consumption, but it's not something that we would routinely use the carbon portal for, apart from to do those basic calculations. Where its strength is understanding where those servers are housed, and the transmission lines, etc., and the embodied carbon associated with those assets to maintain those servers in the first place. But yes, it's a very fast, easy calculation to do on here. And using the operational energy section that we have, libraries that we have that are updated on a yearly basis globally. So, are other verticals besides construction available or planned as well? So shall I pass across to you, Natasha, in terms of verticals? And I'm assuming you're meaning buildings there.
So we do have a couple of databases that relate to building materials used in different regions of the world, etc. In terms of having a high-level asset buildings, it's something that we're talking about uploading, but that isn't quite available there yet. There's a next question about how does this compare with the RSSB rail carbon tool? I think you might want to take that one, Kim.
Okay, so we use the tool to inform low carbon design and to make those decisions dynamically whilst we're designing, because it's quick and easy. We do use the RSSB rail tool to do a calculation at the end of life, but we do find it harder to use if we're trying to make those dynamic decisions. Yes. Again, it's horses for courses, really. The aim of the portal is to make those low carbon decisions. Hence, we've designed it to be easy for anyone to pick up other than a carbon specialist. And are the libraries open source or MOPMAC proprietary? Some of them we have built up literally over 15 years of calculating carbon. We have been working in this space for a very long time, and those sit behind the scenes of the portal itself. But we do use open source libraries within the test system. You'll have access to those open source libraries. But at the moment, we do have a lot of data sitting behind the scenes that is literally behind the scenes at this moment in time. Hopefully that answers your question. So the next one is from Callum. For the construction carbon, how does this include aspects like carbon incurred from transport to labour to site? So with that is that we literally have construction carbon. We can calculate the carbon emitted by vans, boats, you name it. We have the emission factors behind there. So as long as you know what the distance is, how far they're travelling, you can use the portal to calculate that. So you can see Natasha getting that one, and I'm very aware that I've got very carried away. It is now 1 minute past 1. We've still got lots of questions to answer, but what we'll do is we will go through all the questions and provide feedback on them. But I think it just remains for myself and Natasha to say thank you so much for giving up your lunch break to come and join us as we showed the latest developments of the Carbon Portal. She continues to be developed, and we are very dependent on your feedback to shape the future of the portal and what works. But please contact us if you want a free demo. Again, go to our site and go and have a play and see whether the portal does what you need her to do. Okay, thank you very much. Enjoy your lunch.